COVID-19 is in our communities and the number of cases is on the rise. So it's essential that we each play our part in full by following all of the government guidance. Only by doing this can we keep our schools and businesses open. If you're young and healthy, you may feel the virus isn't a threat to you. But someone more vulnerable to coronavirus than you, perhaps someone closer to you than you realise, is depending on you to play your part in breaking the chain of transmission. So I'm asking everyone to do their bit. Stick to the rule of 6 for gatherings indoors or outdoors. Wash your hands thoroughly and regularly. Wear a face covering in enclosed spaces. Observe social distancing of 2 metres or 1 metre plus precautions where 2 metres really isn't possible. Follow all of the guidelines about car sharing. If you have symptoms, self-isolate and get a free test immediately. If we work together on this, we can control the spread of the virus. Thank you. COVID-19 is in our communities and the number of cases is on the rise. So it's essential that we each play our part in full by following all of the government guidance. Only by doing this can we keep our schools and businesses open. If you're young and healthy, you may feel the virus isn't a threat to you. But someone more vulnerable to coronavirus than you, perhaps someone closer to you than you realise, is depending on you to play your part in breaking the chain of transmission. So I'm asking everyone to do their bit. Stick to the rule of 6 for gatherings indoors or outdoors. Wash your hands thoroughly and regularly. Wear a face covering in enclosed spaces. Observe social distancing of 2 metres or 1 metre plus precautions where 2 metres really isn't possible. Follow all of the guidelines about car sharing. If you have symptoms, self-isolate and get a free test immediately. If we work together on this, we can control the spread of the virus. Thank you.
Right, I'll try again. Good morning. Welcome to this meeting of Nottinghamshire County Council's Planning and Licensing Committee. I'm Councillor Chris Barnfather. I'm the chair of the committee. I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting. This meeting is being held remotely. It's been broadcast live and recorded for publication, with the majority of the members joining the meeting from their own homes. So, as well as myself, the other members present in the meeting today are Councillor Pauline Allen, Councillor Andy Brown, Councillor Neil Clark, Councillor Jim Creamer, Councillor Sybil Fielding, Councillor Tony Harper, Councillor Paul Henshaw, Councillor John Longdon, Councillor Rachel Madden, Councillor Tracy Taylor, Councillor Keith Walker, and Councillor Andy Wetton. We also have the following officers present today: Team Manager for Trading Standards, Fiona Needham; Planning Group Manager, Sally Gill; Development Manager, Management Team Manager, Jonathan Smith; Major Projects Senior Practitioner, David Marsh; Principal Officer, Joel Marshall; and our Legal Services Solicitor, Rachel Clack. And we have clerking the meeting, Mr. Peter Barker. Can I also welcome and just confirm the presence, please, of the following people who I understand will be delivering speeches in relation to some of the matters that we're going to be hearing this morning. I have Chris Chambers, who is a neighbour representation in relation to the Daneshill application. Can you confirm, Mr. Chambers, that you were with us?
I am with you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. Welcome. I have Mr. Ian Prince, who is equally a neighbour representation in relation to that application.
Indeed, yes, I'm here as well.
Thank you. And Ms. Vivian French, another neighbour representation. Ms. French, can you confirm your presence?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can now. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you.
Representing Chilworth Parish Council.
Yes, present, Chair.
Thank you. Representing Lound Parish Council, Nick Prout.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. Representing Sutton Cum Lound Parish Council, Angela Close.
Morning, present, Chair.
Morning. Representing Ranskill Parish Council, Dan Simpson.
Yes, good morning, Chair.
Good morning. And representing the applicant, I have Sam Thistlethwaite.
Yes, Chair, I'm here.
Thank you. And I understand that we also have present on behalf of the applicant, albeit not speaking unless there to assist with the answers to any technical questions, Stephen Forster, John Owens and James Cook.
Yes, Chair, I'm here. James Cook.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you.
Yes, Chair.
I'll take that everybody is present. So this meeting of the Planning and Licensing Committee will be held in line with the new requirements of the Coronavirus Act of 2020. So please do bear with us if we experience any technical issues. And as you've already seen from the start of this meeting, it does happen, despite our best intentions. If we do lose any members from the call temporarily, then officers will seek to assist in getting them reconnected as soon as possible, hopefully without the need to halt proceedings. Officers will inform the meeting if they are unable to rectify the problem and if we need the meeting to be paused or adjourned temporarily. Hopefully that won't be the case. And can I just inform everybody that at this stage that item 6 on the agenda, the application for the change of use of land to allow for the extension of the existing yard at Briggs Metals, Great North Road, Newark, has been withdrawn from this meeting today. So if I can move on to the items that we still do have on the agenda. First of all, item 1, which is the minutes of the last meeting held on the 8th of September 2020, which are pages 3 to 6 in your bundles. I'm not putting these minutes to the vote. I'll sign them at the end of the meeting. If any member has anything that they wish to raise in relation to those minutes, could they perhaps indicate? I'm getting no hands, so I'm assuming, unless somebody shouts out, that people are happy with those minutes. And as I say, I'll sign those at the end of the meeting. Thank you. Item 2 is apologies for absence. Mr. Barker.
Thank you, Chair. We've had no apologies for absence.
Thank you. Item 3 is the declaration of interest by members and officers. A, disclosable pecuniary interests. And B, private interests, pecuniary and non-pecuniary. Item 4, declarations of lobbying, please. Councillor Taylor, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Not so much lobbying directly, other than you're already aware, I have been dealing with residents on one of the applications and will recuse myself from item 7 in order to speak to that item as the divisional representative.
So you'll be speaking to the item and taking no part in the vote.
Exactly so, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Taylor. Item 5. I'm going to take this item first. I appreciate we have a number of speakers, so if you'll bear with us, but this is normally a very short item, and it will allow the officer to actually get on with their day job. So item 5, which is the annual report of the licensing work carried out by the Trading Standards and Community Service Department. That's pages 7 to 12 in your bundle. And could I ask Fiona Needham to introduce the item, please?
Morning. Yeah, morning. So this is the annual report from Trading Standards in relation to our licensing work that we've carried out. So from the 1st of June 2019 until the 30th of June 2020, the Trading Standards Service received a total of £20,056 income from licenses, registrations and other related fees. And they're broken down as you can see, for explosives, 5,267, petroleum, 12,224, and petroleum record searches for 2,565. So we have an obligation and responsibility for issuing explosive licenses for the storage of explosives such as fireworks, safety cartridges, and airbag detonators. We issued a total of 51 explosive licenses in the period, with a further 4 explosive licenses issued for the storage of safety cartridges. We did issue also 2 licenses in relation to all year round licenses for businesses wanting to supply fireworks all year round. Before Bonfire Night last year, we did a total of 55 inspections across the county, which included high-risk premises, medium-risk premises and new premises. So that's it in relation to explosives. In relation to petroleum storage, we obviously certify any premises that wants to store petrol in a tank or bowser for delivery into the fuel tank of a vehicle or other internal combustion engine. So during the period, we issued 2 licenses for petroleum under 2,500 litres, 19 for between 2,550 and 28 exceeding 50,000. We also hold detailed records about petroleum storage facilities at new and historic sites, and we had 19 requests in terms of searches about those sites during the period as well. And just to let you know that the fees that we charge hadn't changed this year. They're nationally set and they haven't been changed at all. So if please I could go to our recommendations, which would be that members consider the updates and highlight any actions required, that members agree to the appropriate use of the media to highlight the results of the fireworks safety inspections programme for the coming licensing period, and agree that I give a further update report at the meeting of the committee in June 2021 that covers the complete financial year from the 1st of April this year to the 31st of May next year. So that's just a very brief outline of our report. So if there's any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Ms Needham. I formally move the recommendation. Do I have a seconder, please?
Councillor Creamer seconded formally. Reserve the right to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Creamer. Members, any questions for the officers?
No.
I've got Councillor Longden.
Thank you, Chair. It's not a fireworks question, it's about petrol, if that's okay.
Yes.
It's on page 9, 17. I may assume this answer, but I'm a former engineer, so I don't like assuming, trained not to. We did have 40,000, so I would say, independent traders for petrol. We're now down to 8,500. Can I have a clarification on the reason for that, please?
So that's across the UK at present.
Yes.
Yes. What for the reason why that they've reduced?
Well, we lost 30,000 according to this anyway. I just answer for clarification as far as my own mind.
Yeah. It's just that the number of smaller petrol stations and dispensing premises are going down. You know, the independent ones. They are getting less and less, and that's the figures as it is at present. Is that enough?
Not really. I'm assuming it's the superstore that's taking this sort of trade, but it's an assumption. I'm an engineer. That part we don't necessarily fit in that part. It's part of being an engineer. I just like to clarify it.
That's okay. I can get some more detail for you if that's what you want. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Longden. I think you actually hit the nail on the head with what you said. You know, we probably grew up where most garages, you know, that serviced your vehicle also sold petrol. It was sort of a bolt on to the day job. And obviously, as years have progressed, you now tend to have sites which are dedicated to the sale of petrol and small convenience stores. So larger sites and the smaller retailers, petroleum retailers, tend to now just concentrate, I think, on you know, repairs and the engineering aspect of their job rather than, and I assume that's because of the tightening up of restrictions and legislation around the storage and sale of petroleum in the first place. But thank you for your question. Do you have any other questions? Sorry, Councillor Fielding.
Under point 18, that the new installation actually is up and running. The actual new store, which is within the division I represent, is officially opened this next coming Monday. But the petrol part of it has been up and running for a couple of weeks, and it's pay at the pump.
Good news. Hopefully that's reduced your costs, Councillor Fielding.
I can't do pay at the pump.
Okay, thank you for that update. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chairman. The trading standards may be only a small unit of the Nottinghamshire County Council, but they do a fabulous job. On behalf of the committee, I'd just like to thank them for all the hard work that they do.
Thank you very much.
Well said.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Walker. You're absolutely right. I mean, the report before us today has put a very small part of the work that they do across the county to protect consumers and particularly some of the more vulnerable members of our community. But I'd like to thank Ms Needham for the report before us.
Thank you.
We obviously have recommendations which have been moved. If there are no more questions, then I'll put this to the vote, please. I'm not going to do a named vote on this item. It's non-contentious. All those in favour, if you can indicate, or it'd perhaps be easy to indicate if anybody is not in favour, your voice will stand out. You've got a legacy hand up, Councillor Walker. I assume that was from your earlier question. Yeah, I've got nothing else showing on my screen, so I'm assuming that all members are in favour. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms Needham, and we'll let you get on with your busy day.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So moving back to the agenda, as I've already alluded to, item 6 on the agenda has now been withdrawn. So the new item 6, your item 7 on your papers, at pages 57 to 128 in your bundles is an application for temporary operations for 10 years for a soil treatment facility at Danes Hill landfill site, Lounge. And Mr. Smith, I understand that you're going to present this item.
Thank you, Chair. I hope everyone can hear me. This application is seeking a 10-year permission for a soil treatment facility to process imported, contaminated, hazardous and non-hazardous soils on land within part of the Danes Hill landfill complex at Lound, north of Retford. The landfill sits between Torworth and Lound and is accessed via a dedicated access road off Danes Hill Road. The Danes Hill Lakes Nature Reserve lies to the west, and Mattersey Marsh, site of special scientific interest, is to the north, as shown on this slide. The landfill is currently in a mothballed situation, requiring further restoration works as well as ongoing management for emissions. Restoration is required to be completed by 2048 in accordance with approved master plans and other details. The application site comprises approximately half of the materials recycling area, which is an area of vacant, hard-standing and broken ground lying centrally within the complex and abutting a dense woodland to the south. This area benefits from 3 extant but currently non-operational planning permissions for inert waste recycling, with 3 years left to run on these time-limited permissions. The area is then due to be restored as part of the wider landfill site no later than 2048. The nearest residential receptors include the permanent travellers site approximately 200 metres to the south, separated by an area of woodland, Danes Hill cottages near to the entrance onto the access road to the west, and a series of properties at Landfill Farm 600 metres to the east, beyond one of the 2 landfill areas and a further block of woodland. This aerial photograph, looking east, shows the 2 landfill areas with a focus on the western incomplete landfill area, the application site, surrounding woodlands, and 2 of the 3 main receptors highlighted by the R's in the red circles. Danes Hill cottages to the bottom right, the travellers site top right, with Landfill Farm not shown but indicated by the R top left and the arrow pointing towards their location, as detailed on an earlier slide, which is Plan 2 in your papers. Again, this next slide shows the site with the woodland area to the south, which is to the right, and the nearest receptor being the travellers site at the corner of the woods on Danes Hill Road. There is a ready mixed concrete plant on the other side of the road. This photo looks west down Danes Hill Road from the landfill access road junction towards the railway crossing, with Danes Hill cottages just before the access road. In the same location, this is looking east down the start of the access road. A public footpath runs along its length, although this terminates just before the gates to the landfill site. This is a view of the application site. As it can be seen, this is a brownfield site with remnants of its historic use as part of the Royal Ordnance Factory. This includes some concrete surfacing, but peripheral areas are more disturbed and have been taken over by ruderal plants and areas of developing scrub. It is surrounded by trees and woodland. The proposal is to construct and operate a soils treatment facility on approximately half of this area. The facility would take up to 50,000 tonnes per annum of soils arising from development sites locally and regionally. These will comprise around 30,000 tonnes per annum of soils contaminated with either hydrocarbons or bound asbestos, and around 20,000 tonnes per annum of non-hazardous soils. Therefore, over the 10 years sought for its operation, potentially up to 500,000 tonnes could be accepted and treated. Once decontaminated, the soils would be utilised towards completing the authorised restoration scheme for the wider site. The 2 main drivers for the proposal are therefore to provide a fixed, regulated facility to take these materials and assist in the cleaning up and redevelopment of previously developed sites, and secondly, as a means to viably attract the soils which are needed towards achieving the final restoration. The site has had difficulty in attracting suitable soils since the landfill stopped accepting non-hazardous waste around 3 years ago. The facility will be an almost entirely outdoor operation, with up to 3 treatment pads being constructed as shown on this proposed layout plan. These will be formed as impermeable pads with crushed concrete and a geocomposite clay liner. Each will be surrounded by a drainage collection channel, and all waters falling or collecting on the pads would be captured and channeled to a holding tank. This would require periodic emptying and transport away to an authorised treatment facility. Soils contaminated by hydrocarbons are expected to make up the majority of those accepted. These will be treated in biopiles on the pads through an assisted biodegradation process, whereby a blower and a network of underlying pipes will continuously draw air into and through the biopiles. By maintaining optimal oxygen, water and nutrient contents, a natural bacterial process breaks down the hydrocarbons into carbon dioxide and water over a 12 to 16 week period. The facility would also accept soils contaminated with occasional pieces of asbestos debris. Soils, including those containing asbestos contamination, would require prior clearance and testing before being admitted to the site. The facility would only accept soils with bound forms of asbestos and not loose types which could give rise to airborne release. Those containing asbestos would undergo an initial screening stage using a mechanical screen to separate the soils into three fractions, followed by a manual picking out of any visible pieces of asbestos material. Operatives in full PPE would undertake this on a picking line, and all asbestos will be placed into sealed bags and a lockable skip for subsequent disposal to an authorised facility elsewhere. 1 to 2 skips per year is estimated. If necessary, the soils could then go on to the biotreatment stage. Testing would confirm if the soils have been decontaminated before it is made available for the restoration works. Except for the continuous operation of the blower system, the site would operate and admit vehicles between 7:30 a.m. and 6 p.m. Monday to Friday and 7:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Saturdays, with no Sunday or public and bank holiday working. The application states that 10 full-time equivalent jobs would be created. In terms of the consultation, 42 letters of objection have been received from local residents and the wider community. Issues raised include potential health impacts from airborne asbestos, traffic and associated amenity impacts, including to visitors to the nature reserve, noise, ecology, and a desire to see the site closed and restored earlier and by different means. These matters are set out in detail in the report. No objection has been received from Bassett Law District Council. However, objections have been lodged by the parish councils of Lound, Torworth, Mattersey, Ranskill and Sutton-cum-Lound as set out in the report. No objections have been received from any technical consultee. In terms of the principle of the proposed development, in planning policy terms, the facility would treat and decontaminate soils and so falls to be classed as a recycling facility.
Oh. Turn it off.
Okay, I shall continue. I'll start that section again. In terms of the principle of the proposed development in planning policy terms, the facility would treat and decontaminate soils and so falls to be classed as a recycling facility. The development of all new recycling facilities is supported in principle in order to minimise the need to dispose of such materials en masse. The resulting soils will be beneficially used to help achieve the final site restoration, including its final landform, planting, habitats and public pathways. Officers consider there is a need for a new specialist soil recycling facility in the county and wider region, and that there is a clear local need and site-specific justification for co-siting it with the landfill, which will be the end user of the treated soils. Planning permission for the landfill is extant until 2048 until it is restored earlier. Therefore, whilst it is sited in a countryside setting, the site itself, including the application site, is not considered to currently form part of the open countryside for planning policy purposes, and this will continue to be the case for the 10-year duration of the facility which is being sought. It is an authorised waste management facility, which includes previously developed land forming the application site. The proposal is appropriate in this situation and it can make use of already established site infrastructure, including the site access and wheel cleaning facilities. In terms of potential environmental or community impacts, many of the local objections highlight a fear and anxiety that asbestos fibres could be released to the air and that this could lead to subsequent illness, including terminal disease in the local population, particularly those downwind inland. These are obviously understandable concerns. However, the applicant has sought to assure the Waste Planning Authority that it would not accept soils containing such friable or loose asbestos, and it would only admit bound fragments. A dust management plan and air quality assessment have been submitted. Operations will be managed and routinely monitored to ensure both dust and asbestos is not released, and they are confident that this can be done based on a similar facility of theirs in the West Midlands. Officers note that in that facility, the asbestos soils are dealt with inside a large building, and some of the objectors believe that the proposed operations should also be done within a building. Apart from the ancillary officers and a small picking station, the proposed operations at Danes Hill will be undertaken outside, and the applicant does not propose a processing building, and none of the technical consultees have indicated that one is required. The Environment Agency confirms that the operations would require a new environmental permit. They have also recommended that the applicant twin tracks the planning application and the permit application at the same time, although there is no legal requirement for twin tracking to take place. However, the applicant has made it clear that they do not wish to follow this advice and they wish to seek planning permission first. It is, however, understood that a draft permit application has been prepared, albeit not yet submitted. Where in this case both planning permission and an environmental permit will need to be granted to enable the development to proceed, national planning policy makes it clear that the assessment of pollution and emissions are matters which fall to be considered as part of the permit process regulated by the Environment Agency. Planning authorities should not undertake their own assessments on impacts to human health and should rely on the permit process to assess these. The planning assessment should focus on whether the proposal is an acceptable use of the land. Due to its co-siting within an established landfill site, the extant permissions for inert waste recycling on the site, the established screening, which means the site cannot be viewed from other properties or the public highway or public paths, and its separation from residential receptors, the site is considered to be advantageous for the proposed activities. The Environment Agency will subsequently need to be satisfied that emissions and any risk of pollution are adequately controlled and prevented. If the EA were to subsequently require a new building as part of the permit process, this would require a further planning permission, and the applicant is aware of this. Whilst there are two separate regimes and ultimately it is the permit process which will focus on the impacts to human health, the applicant is nevertheless prepared to accept a planning condition requiring there to be no increase above background levels for airborne asbestos concentrations. This requirement is included as condition 32 of the recommended conditions. The EA also advised that the surface water management system will be critical given the underlying sensitive groundwaters. Outline details have been provided within the submitted drainage strategy, and the final details would be required under recommended condition 11 prior to any importation of material onto the site. There will be no discharge of contaminated waters to the environment. Natural England is satisfied that subject to this management, there will be no pollution or impact to Mattersey Marsh SSSI. An updated ecology survey has been provided during the consideration of the application. Based on this, the County Council's ecologist does not object, subject to retaining the undeveloped area to the immediate east as a retained open mosaic habitat to support a population of invertebrates and moths that are present. This and other precautions relating to the construction stage are recommended conditions. A noise impact assessment has been provided and reviewed by the County Council's noise consultant. He is satisfied that the operations would not be particularly noisy and recommends conditions to protect nearby residential receptors, including those at Landfill Farm. There are various objections received to the associated HGV traffic, its routing and associated amenity impacts, including to visitors of the nearby Daneshill Lakes Nature Reserve. Each of the parish councils have their own view on HGV routing. It is acknowledged that present traffic levels serving the landfill site are minimal and that the proposal would reintroduce site traffic. However, the landfill site already has permission to run a significant number of HGVs per day, and the application proposes that the total site traffic, including those serving the proposed soil treatment facility, will be managed so to not increase the overall numbers permitted. Indeed, peak traffic numbers are likely to be much lower. No objection has therefore been raised by the County Highways Authority. There is an established, albeit not formally stipulated, HGV route to and from the A638 Great North Road via Daneshill Road. The associated traffic is not considered to have an unacceptable impact to local amenity along this route, and it is routinely used by farm traffic and other industries. It is considered reasonable that the use of this HG route be confirmed by recommended planning condition 21. In terms of the restoration issues being raised, this slide shows the current landfill site layout and landform. The two landfill areas to the west and east can be seen divided by a noticeable central valley and the operational areas, including the materials recycling area. In the western landfill, one cell remains to be constructed and filled, and there are areas which do not have sufficient depths of soils at present. The applicant has provided further details, including this plan, to show where the post-treated soils would be beneficially used, including the infill of the central valley and topping up of soil depths. The operational areas with the landfill gas engines would need to be retained for the foreseeable future. The use of these soils is in line with working towards the final approved restoration master plans as shown on this slide, which provides a comprehensive design and landform. The full design can be completed once the gas engines are no longer needed. It also envisages over-tipping of the materials recycling area to create an area of heathland. Whilst the proposals would not lead to the final completion of the restoration works, the soils would make a substantial contribution towards the end objective, and it is hoped that it would overcome the present difficulty of attracting restoration soils to the site and resolve the immediate and pressing need for these materials. The Waste Planning Authority previously requested an alternative restoration design once the site ceased general landfilling in 2017-18, and noting that the site was not being restored as planned. The submitted scheme was not acceptable and could not be approved. Progress with restoration continued to stall owing to a lack of available soils. The present proposal seeks to directly overcome this difficulty and work towards the required restoration. While some objectors would wish to see the site restored earlier and with fewer materials, there does not appear to be good reason for not continuing to work towards the required end objective and realise the lasting benefits, including public access, that it is designed to provide on completion. In conclusion, after considering the issues raised, officers consider the proposal complies with the development plan and support a grant of planning permission. It will provide a useful facility serving regeneration projects in the local economy and wider region, whilst also helping to deliver the local community benefits from the final restoration. Planning conditions are recommended to ensure the facility remains linked to the landfill site. Firstly, to ensure that the life of the proposal does not extend beyond 2048 and is limited to 10 years, but allowing for 3 years to commence and provide time for the applicant to secure the necessary environmental permit. Secondly, to ensure all suitable post-treated soils are retained for the purposes of the restoration, upon which much of the need for the development rests. And upon its cessation, to ensure the site is restored as part of the wider landfill site under the requirements of the main landfill planning permission. The Waste Planning Authority will continue to monitor progress with the site restoration. A range of conditions are recommended, including the aforementioned condition 32, which effectively requires there to be no release of airborne asbestos, which the applicant has committed to. Condition 10 is also recommended to establish a local community liaison forum. It is considered that these conditions and the subsequent environmental permit application process, and if granted, its ongoing regulation, are capable of providing the necessary safeguards to human health and provide ongoing reassurance to the local community. Finally, the Waste Planning Authority understands that if and when an environmental permit application is submitted to the Environment Agency, the EA may themselves undertake a public consultation exercise. This, however, is at their discretion and may only be run for bespoke proposals or ones creating a significant public interest. It is clear that there has been a significant public interest in this proposal, and in particular on the matter of air emissions, which fall to the EA to consider. Officers therefore suggest that if planning permission is granted, that a letter be written by the Chair on behalf of this committee to the Environment Agency, requesting that a further public consultation be run to accompany the permit application. Before concluding and making a recommendation to committee, officers need to bring some late correspondence to committee's attention. Following the publication of committee papers, officers were copied into correspondence from Friends of the Earth to the National Planning Casework Unit, which acts on behalf of the Secretary of State. Friends of the Earth have requested the Secretary of State provide a screening direction as they consider the proposed development to constitute environmental impact assessment development, which therefore requires an environmental statement to be undertaken and to inform the planning decision. As set out at paragraph 69 of the report, the Waste Planning Authority provided a screening opinion regarding the proposed development prior to the planning application being submitted, concluding that the proposal did not require EIA. Officers have kept this matter under review whilst considering the planning application and continue to be of the opinion that the proposal is not EIA development. However, in light of the request to the Secretary of State, and taking account of the standard 3-week period he has to provide a screening direction, officers propose a revised recommendation which would replace that in paragraph 292 of your report. The revised recommendation is detailed on this slide and would read as follows. It is recommended that, subject to the Secretary of State first issuing a negative EIA screening direction, planning permission be granted subject to the conditions set out in Appendix 1. Members need to consider the issues set out in the report and resolve accordingly. Effectively, if members do resolve to grant planning permission today, the planning permission itself could not be issued until the Secretary of State has responded, stating that an EIA is not required. If the Secretary of State were to respond stating that an EIA is required, then the planning permission could not be issued until such time as an EIA has been prepared and submitted by the applicant and then been subject to formal publicity and consultation in accordance with the EIA regulations. Upon the completion of that process, the application will be reported back to committee for determination. Thank you, Chair. And just confirm that the case officer, Joel Marshall, and myself will endeavour to answer any questions raised during the consideration of this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, for your very comprehensive presentation. We have a recommendation as amended by Mr. Smith. I formally move that recommendation. Do I have a seconder, please?
Formally seconded by Councillor Creamer and reserve the right to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Creamer. Now, we have a number of speakers for and against this application. Before we get into the speakers, I just ask Mr. Barker, please, to explain the rules on public speaking.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just for the benefit of the speakers, before I read out the speaking arrangements, I'll just confirm the order in which the speakers will be asked to deliver their speeches. So first it will be Chris Chambers, followed by Vivian French, Ian Prince, Nick Prout, Angela Close, Alison Douce, Dan Simpson, Sam Thistlethwaite, and finally Councillor Taylor. So the speaking arrangements, each speaker will have a maximum of 3 minutes, with the exception of Councillor Taylor, who's entitled to a maximum of 10 minutes. Notice will be given to you when the final minute of your allotted time has arrived by me saying 1 minute. Speakers should not introduce new material, be that plan, photographs or written documents. Only issues relevant to the planning application should be addressed in the presentation. These include impact on local residents and the environment, relevant planning policies and government guidance. You should not refer to non-planning issues such as property rights, covenants, loss of property value or view. Members of the committee may ask you questions for the purposes of clarification. The chairman will invite the relevant officer to respond to any factual matters raised by your presentation or subsequent questions. So, without further ado, Mr. Chambers, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. I would like to comment on the risks associated with asbestos, and I am recognised by the courts as one of the UK's leading independent experts in this field. Health and safety responsibilities are established in statutory law and in common law, which sets a higher standard and is based on the potential maximum for exposure. There are a number of areas in this application where there is a significant risk from asbestos, which include the transport of asbestos contaminated soils, the tipping of those soils, the disturbance of those soils during screening, for example, storage of the soils, including hot and windy weather, and the asbestos picking operations themselves. The law, under health and safety law, the controls proposed by this applicant fall well short of those required under the common law. The applicant has also shown that additional controls need to be taken and, in fact, are taken at its other site in Rowley Regis. As part, for example, at that site, the work is done inside a building with filtration and using water suppression. In part, not only because the applicant has identified a significant risk of fibre release at a receptor site 990 metres upwind of that site. Additional relevant factors are, this proposal is that the work is to be done outdoors and includes amphibole, the most dangerous type of asbestos. Amphiboles are 100 times, in the case of amosite, or 500 times for chrysidolite, more likely to cause mesothelioma than chrysotile. The site at Rowley Regis can only handle chrysotile, where the application here is to handle other forms of asbestos. This could result in soils being rejected at Rowley Regis and then subsequently transported to Daneshill for processing, which will increase vehicle movement by road over potentially very long distances. And then you've got the waste core strategy at 11 to think about. The applicant and the screening opinion consider that any asbestos would not cause a significant risk because it wouldn't be released. That position simply is incorrect. The government defines significant risk from asbestos when it is at a level above that commonly found in areas including the general outdoor environment. And I note the condition on the permit. The environmental levels are believed to be in the range of 0.501 to 0.301 fibres per millilitre. The sampling that is suggested by the applicant and included in the permit is not sensitive enough to actually sample background levels, so there is no way on the basis of their proposals that they could actually satisfy that condition. Additionally, the council may have a duty of care under health and safety law, and as a client, in case that may need thinking about. So therefore, on those basis, I believe the application should be refused, or at least the process paused to think about the screening direction, and also to agree with the applicant on further conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chambers. Mr. Smith, many of the points raised by Mr. Chambers there were a technical matter. Are you able to assist us with any responses to that, or any clarification?
Chair, I think I'd just like to pick up on a point. Mr. Chambers has made a reference to the applicant's facility at Rowley Regis in the West Midlands, and the fact that the asbestos element of that site is undertaken within a building. The report does acknowledge at paragraph 192 that the subsequent permit process which the applicant needs to go through, as part of that process, the Environment Agency might, for example, require that those operations do take place inside a building at Daneshill as well. And if that were to be the case, then clearly, if the applicant was agreeable to that, they would need to come back to the Waste Planning Authority to seek planning permission for that building, and the authority will be able to consider that matter again.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Members, do you have any questions for Mr. Chambers for clarification purposes only, please? No, I don't see any hands up. If I'm missing anybody, please shout out. Okay, in that case, thank you. We'll move on, please, to our second speaker, Mr. Ian Prince.
Oh, no, sorry.
My apologies. I'm sorry. I have two lists of speakers here and they're in a different order. My apologies. Ms. French.
Good morning. I will refer to the NCC report relating to Daneshill for September 2018 and October 2020. The 2018 report gives a short-term restoration plan to end in the year 2023. Point 110 says the variations do not relate to a new facility, which in principle would not be acceptable in the open countryside. FCC in October 20 is now applying for a new facility in open countryside. Why does this revised short-term restoration plan remain unapproved? What are the unresolved concerns raised in 2020 parts 27 and 163? Confusion, misleading, contradictory statements refer to a temporary 10-year open-air project. A similar operation by FCC at Rowley Regis is described as completely safe. However, there the asbestos picking is not in the open air, but in an enclosed building. How can any decision be made today concerning a project with such hazardous material as asbestos without input from the Environment Agency, which admits that they have insufficient information? FCC has not followed standard protocol to twin track this with an environmental impact assessment to ensure the planning authority are cognizant of the likely significant environmental effects before making a decision. This would have reassured the local residents that there would be safety controls and monitoring of emissions and dust from this potentially dangerous project. Does this development qualify under Schedule 3 for an environment impact assessment screening on the grounds of pollution risks to human health and risks due to air pollution from loose asbestos fibres? FCC says HGVs would tip their loads and soils would be moved by front loaders. Surely dust emissions are an obvious consequence. To agree with the Waste Core strategy policy, there must be a clear need for such a new facility. It would appear that by failing to find uncontaminated soils locally for the restoration, they have created this need for the financial gain of their company. I suggest that the best outcome is for the September 2018 revised plan to be approved, importing soils from the many, many large local building projects in our area. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. French. Mr. Smith, before I go to members, do you have any comments to make in relation to that presentation?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Ms. French has made reference to a report in 2018 when that was when planning permission was granted to create an inert waste importation facility on roughly the same land which is being considered now for this planning application. And at that time, the applicant anticipated being able to attract sufficient soils which were non-hazardous and inert in order to realise the restoration of the site. Sadly, over the past couple of years, very few soils have been able to have attracted to the site, hence why the applicant has revisited the rationale of how they're going to deliver the restoration of the site, and subsequently have come forward with this application. I sympathise with the feelings of local residents as far as, yes, it would have been, if that previous permission had been had attracted the materials that it was anticipating to, then the restoration works would now be would have progressed quite significantly by now. And but unfortunately, as members saw when we were on site at the site visit last week, there were some soils that had recently been brought into the site, but they've just not been able to attract soils in sufficient quantities. In reference to the screening, clearly that's been reflected in the revised recommendation that I referenced earlier. The matter has been passed on to the National Planning Casework Unit for their opinion or direction, and the revised recommendation accommodates that process being undertaken. And I don't know if I think Joel might want to come in with a couple of points as well, if that's okay, Chair.
Yes, please. We'll take Mr. Marshall now, I think, if it's relevant to the last speaker, and then we keep a better flow, I think, for members.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to pick up on the point made about twin tracking. As we've reported, the Environment Agency recommended that the applicant twin track their planning application with their application for an environmental permit. The applicant, for their own reasons, have decided not to follow that advice and are seeking planning permission before seeking the permit. Our advice on this is that there is no legal requirement to undertake twin tracking. That it could be beneficial in some circumstances. However, we understand that the applicant has prepared a draft permit in mind. They have done that work. It is ready to submit, and ultimately it is for the Environment Agency to then go through that process and consider that application, and that will be, I'm sure, a thorough and robust process. If further changes are needed as a result of that process, then potentially, as alluded to earlier, things like a new building, for example, that would have to potentially come back through the planning system again. But where we stand today, we can't require them to twin track. Clearly, the Environment Agency would have preferred that, but we still have a planning decision to make independently of the permit process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Just for clarification for myself and the members of the committee, is the precedent where, although there may be an interest in twin tracking, is there precedent where indeed other applicants for other sites, in your experience, have not followed the twin track process, where separate applications have been made, as in this case? And again, just for clarification, the two processes are entirely separate processes that actually, to a large degree, look at different aspects of the application. The application before us today is in relation to the use of the site. An application for an environmental permit to the Environment Agency would be in relation to the potential threats to health and monitoring of the process itself.
Indeed, the report is quite clear on this matter. We are in the situation where there are two regimes, and we are the planning authority in this case. We are not the permitting authority, and the permitting authority, being the Environment Agency, it will be their task to consider the environmental permit application that will be made to them, and to consider in particular the issues of airborne pollution and contamination. Those matters are firmly in their remit, not ours. Our role looks at the use of the land and sustainable development, those matters. The NPPF is quite clear that pollution control is a matter for the Environment Agency. Just on your other point about any experience on this matter, I think the Environment Agency do recommend twin tracking quite often. in this particular case, they have made it clear that they would prefer it to be twin tracked, but ultimately that will have to go through the full process, and you know, we are making our recommendation happy with the recommendation and consider it to be a correct use of the land, an appropriate use of the land, and we've not identified other planning objections or reasons to depart from that.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Members of the committee, do you have any questions for Ms. French for clarification purposes, please? I'm not seeing any hands, so I'm taking that as a no. Unless anybody shouts out, I'll move on, please, to our third speaker, Mr. Prince.
Hello, good morning. Good morning to everybody. Yeah.
Good morning.
As a chartered building engineer and chartered building surveyor, I probably understand more than most the health risks and legislation associated with asbestos fibres. There is no safe health limit for the exposure to airborne asbestos fibres, and given that they are of microscopic proportions, the idea of being able to visually pick asbestos fibres dumped by a lorry is a nonsense. Discharge will release such fibres from any material, and I am appalled at the very fact that this has been considered even as a reasonable use for the land. It is not a reasonable use for the land. It will affect the health of residents, dwellings nearby, villages, and it can be carried away in the air, and it can affect a much wider area. The idea that the twin tracking is separate is a ridiculous idea. It should be forced on this company, who are there for profit, only profit, that they do twin track it, and that if they are doing this already in the West Midlands, why are they bringing all of their stuff that they can't get rid of anywhere back to here? That is so appalling, and as a consideration for the area, Daneshill has changed significantly in the last 30 years from what it was. I can remember what it was, and I'm sure quite a few people locally can remember how it was. The idea that you cannot find suitable soils, why not? Have you tried hard enough? I think it's been a failure of the council to actually attract those sort of things, and now they're now taking the worst kind of to supposedly restore this area. The erudite knowledge and opinion from anyone associated with such deadly tumours of asbestos and the negative long-term health effects of asbestos fibres absolutely determine that this proposal should be rejected. It is not suitable, and to do it in the open air is a nonsense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prince. Mr. Smith, do you have any comments, please? Or Mr. Marshall?
Chair, I think I really do, to reiterate previous comments, really, in terms of, the planning and the permit processes, and it will be the permit process that would deal with those risks from asbestos fibres, and they are two separate processes. Yes, I think it would have been useful if it had been twin tracked, and it could have informed this, the permit process could have informed this meeting. But as Mr. Marshall said, that there's no statutory requirement, and the applicant is within their rights to submit the permit application after the planning process has run its course. But just to reiterate that the site would not be able to operate without both of those, without both a planning permission and an environmental permit being in place.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Sorry, Mr. Marshall, you seem to be doing a double act with Mr. Smith today. Is there anything you wish to add?
Not particularly, no. I think that last point was very pertinent. The application, the development needs both planning and permitting for it to admit waste and operate. And it does not follow necessarily that planning permission leads to a permit. The permit would be looked at completely separately and robustly, I'm confident of that, by the Environment Agency. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for clarification purposes, for me, if you will, Mr. Prince referred to the fact that the company should, or the applicant should be forced to twin track. Is there indeed any mechanism that could be done? It may be advisable or even recommended, but is there any legal mechanism that could force the company to do that? And secondly, we've talked about airborne asbestos. Just for clarification, my understanding from the papers before us that we're talking about bound asbestos. Perhaps you could just clarify that.
On that latter point, you are correct, Chair. Yes, that is what is being proposed. And I suppose in respect of the twin tracking, it's slightly hypothetical that if the Environment Agency had made an objection to the planning application and said that we will not withdraw that objection until we have seen a application for an environmental permit and been able to look at the matters in greater detail, then we could have been in a different situation. But the Environment Agency's position is clear and is set out in the report. They have not raised an objection to the planning application. They've strongly recommended that the permit be twin tracked, but they've not kind of almost made that a stipulation through raising an objection to the planning application. So no, we don't have any statutory power therefore to require the permit to be submitted in advance of the application being determined.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr. Smith. Members of the committee, do you have any questions for Mr. Prince, please, for clarification purposes only? No, I'm not seeing any hands. Mr. Smith, my screen is mostly covered by the recommendation, which is still up. Are you able to remove that so I can actually see more of the speech?
I think Joel's in control of that. I shall ask him to do that now.
That's better. I was looking at some very, very tiny images of speakers at the bottom of the screen. Thank you for that. In that case, then, can we move on, please, to our fourth speaker, which on my second list of speakers is Mr. Prout from Lown Parish Council.
No, there's another one, isn't there?
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. This proposal to handle the most dangerous types of asbestos in the open air at Daneshill has struck fear into the residents of Lound. It is a fear of a substance which, if allowed to escape through inadequate containment and control, is a killer. You have already heard about the applicant's facility at Rowley Regis, where the type of asbestos handled is many times less dangerous than that proposed for Daneshill. Despite this, the asbestos at Rowley Regis is handled inside a sealed building, which, in the applicant's words, provides regulators with some degree of comfort that emissions can be controlled more easily. In contrast, at Daneshill, the applicant plans to handle this hazardous material entirely in the open air. The picking operation is to take place in a small shelter, which will in no way contribute towards the containment of fine asbestos particles picked up on a dry, windy day. The ability to handle the most dangerous forms of asbestos will attract even more hazardous waste to Lound, and this will necessitate the material being transported over even longer distances. The proposed operating procedures are summed up by BIA Reclamation in Mr. Marshall's report as, these processes and procedures are heavily dependent on the competence and integrity of the operatives undertaking the work, and therefore risk cannot completely be eliminated. It is unfortunate then that a visit by the committee to see the Rowley Regis plant was discouraged by the applicant. Given the above, it is hardly surprising that the residents of Lound have not found the description of the proposed operation to be reassuring. In reality, it will be almost impossible for the applicant to consistently exercise proper control over these very manual operations outside 5.5 days a week for the next 10 years in such a remote location without incidents occurring which will release hazardous asbestos particles into the environment.
1 minute.
No mention is made of the senior site manager who will be needed to run the operations and to ensure that they are carried out correctly at all times. Very surprisingly, no environmental impact assessment has been carried out for this project. Also, liaison with the communities affected has been less than adequate. We believe that the proposal simply does not demonstrate the protections required to ensure a safe and successful operation. Ladies and gentlemen, Lound Parish Council urges you to refuse the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prout. Mr. Smith, do you have any comment to make?
I don't think I do, Chair, over and above, responses I've made in response to previous speakers.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Members of the committee, do you have any questions for Mr. Prout for clarification purposes, please? Seeing no hands, in which case I'll move on to our next speaker, if I may. And that is Ms. Close from Sutton-cum-Lown Parish Council.
Good morning. My name is Angela Close and I am the Chair of Sutton-cum-Lown Parish Council. Thank you for allocating me time to speak at the planning hearing. We fully support and agree with the concerns being raised in the presentations by our colleagues from neighbouring parishes. Our concerns with this application focus on 2 points. First, the lack of consultation with our residents who live less than 2 miles away from this Daneshill site, and second, the question of increased volume of heavy goods vehicles travelling through the village illegally in breach of the 18-tonne weight restriction. Sutton-cum-Lown Parish Council was initially not invited to comment on this application. A resident complained to the council about lorries travelling through the village. The case officer contacted about this confirmed that this planning application had been submitted, but that he had not consulted with us due to the weight restriction. Presumably, he felt that this application would not affect us. So, a village which is positioned less than 2 miles away from the site would therefore have had no consultation at all had not lorry drivers for FCC broken the law travelling illegally through the village. I therefore contest that the consultation process for this application has not been conducted correctly and should be reopened to allow all our residents to have their say on this issue. If lorry drivers for FCC will already break the law knowing that there is an 18-tonne weight restriction through the village, what other laws would FCC allow to be broken or deviate from to achieve their aims? We have to rely on the integrity of local businesses to respect and observe the law, and if they don't, how can we believe they will safeguard our health and well-being when it comes to handling asbestos? This may be a minor indiscretion, but it adds weight to local community beliefs that this company will not comply with other regulations unless strictly governed. As a planning committee, you need to be assured that when you grant permission for any company to operate such a business for a 10-year period, they will undertake the required regulatory process seriously and follow any conditions set. This issue gives cause for doubt in this area. Should you be minded to approve this application, then we request that the condition is enforced in the approval that specifically details legal routing of vehicles, and if FCC are found to have breached this at any point in the 10-year period of the application, they will have breached the planning process and any licence provided them will be revoked. In conclusion,
1 minute.
We believe that we have not been adequately and correctly consulted in relation to this application, and so it does not take into consideration our community's views. The company requesting this 10-year permission has already proven to be unreliable with respect to its adherence to the law and cannot therefore provide sufficient assurance around its handling of contaminated soil to safeguard local community health. And any approved application needs to enforce the condition detailing required vehicle routes and strict penalties for non-compliance. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Ms. Close. Mr. Smith, do you have any comments to make?
I'll let Joel go through the matter of the consultation as Joel's case officer, but just on the issue of the HGVs, yes, we did receive complaints in the recent past about HGVs that were running through Sutton towards the site, and that was in breach of a weight restriction. In considering the application, we were at a point we were going to rely on the weight restrictions to provide the necessary controls in terms of HGV routing, but we noted that a weight unrestricted route could potentially go through Mattersey village to the north, and so we effectively condition 21 in your papers effectively seeks to ensure that any HGVs coming to and from the site use the established HGV route, which is along the main road that takes you towards the junction at Torworth with the Great North Road, and like I say, that condition is recommended in your papers. So I don't know whether Joel can just answer the point on the consultation that was raised.
Yes, certainly. The consultation that we undertook included Lound Parish Council, Torworth Parish Council, Mattersey Parish Council. That was on the basis of available lorry routes, bearing in mind that Sutton-cum-Lown does have a weight limit protecting it, and therefore there is no reason. In fact, it's not allowed for the applicant's HGVs to pass through that particular community. As case officer, I couldn't identify any other material impact on that community, and so they were not initially consulted. However, they have obviously chosen to partake in the consultation, have addressed you today, and we're happy to hear their views and their concerns. It's always a judgment as to how far and how extensive we undertake a consultation. I found consulting with local parish councils to be very useful and very effective, and we have also undertaken letters to the immediate neighbours around the area, but I find the parish councils are very effective in representing their communities. I don't think we have under consulted here. We've done what we need to on the application, is my view.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. If I may, for clarification, Ms. Close referred to Sutton-cum-Lown being 2 miles away from the application site. I'm afraid I, other than my visit the other day, don't know the application area particularly well. Is that a fair estimate of the distance away, and would we, in a similar type of application to this, expect to consult beyond a 2 mile radius?
1.5 miles, actually.
Chair, I mean, I'm desperately trying to have a look on Google Maps whilst talking to you at the same time, trying to ascertain the distance. In terms of whether we would consult that distance on another application, we consult and engage the public and local communities on planning applications on a case by case basis, and as Joel said, those weight limits are in place, and lorries associated with this development shouldn't be coming through Sutton-cum-Lown. They did recently, and we were notified about it, and we took it up with the applicant, and to fair play to the applicant, they stopped running the lorries up there as a result. So hang on a minute, I might just be able to give you a rough estimate as to distances. So that's Sutton-cum-Lown. So bear me a second.
It's to the south.
Yes. Yeah. Now, Freddie,
the name is in
it's from Saturday. It's about 1.25 miles, Chair.
Yes.
About 2 kilometres. So that's the distance. But we have certainly complied with the minimal requirements for the minimal requirements for consultation are quite limited, and we always go above and beyond that, and we don't discount people from getting involved, and we will if we're advised that others want to get involved. As Joel indicated, we're more than happy to take those views into account, and that kind of fully accords with our statement of community involvement, Chair.
So this is just not just about traffic. It's about
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Ms. Close. You've had your opportunity to speak. If we can just allow officers to continue. And do you have any questions from members, please, for clarification purposes? No, apparently not. In which case, if I can move to our next speaker, please, which is Ms. Douce. I hope that I've pronounced that correct, from Torworth Parish Council.
Thank you. Yes, you did. The landfill site has been in operation since 1982. That is 38 years and many tonnes of waste that's already passed through Torworth, with significant impact and loss of local amenity. But that was inert waste. This current proposal to process hazardous soils on the site is a significant change and would increase both short-term risks during the 10 years of operation, but also have longer-term impacts on the site after completion and restoration. Major concerns include the transportation of the hazardous soils to the site and the contaminated waste products from the site. The HGVs already use unclassified country lanes, making shortcuts between the A roads. Buildings down Daneshill Road are already blackened due to exhaust pollution, and the lanes have suffered years of litter and waste ejection. Sheeting is not sufficient to prevent loss of loads along the route, and this is worrying when future contamination could be hazardous waste. The outdoor operation proposal raises concerns on how effectively the asbestos fragments and fibres can be contained. The picking operation only removes visible fragments. It will not remove all of the pieces and the fibres, and these do not degrade. There could be airborne spread, and these will remain in the soil. FCC as operator and NCC as freeholder of the land will remain morally and legally culpable for any resultant human suffering and health claims. In addition, the bioremediation process requires containment of and safe disposal of polluted wastewater, and there will be some groundwater capture. As the site sits on the secondary Sherwood A aquifer, it's used for drinking water and watering food crops. It's a sensitive setting to be at risk of water pollution. Finally, the overall intended use of the site for public access, nature and a leisure facility. Families, children and pets will play on this site, a site that would be created from 300,000 tonnes of asbestos and oil spill reclamations. The association with such hazard will create a stigma and hinder successful adoption and enjoyment by the public. We've mentioned the nearby sites of Mattersey Hill and Daneshill, and again, we do not believe the introduction of hazardous waste at this site demonstrates environmental responsibility and a duty of care. When the world is in such a delicate balance of environmental pollution, decisions made now will be felt and judged by future generations, so they must be the correct ones. We all must take responsibility and be accountable for our part in these decisions. Please think carefully about this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Douce. Mr. Smith, do you have any comments to make? Or Mr. Marshall?
Yeah. Chair, yeah, I may be wrong. I thought Ms. Douce at the start of her speech suggested that that she talked about how long the site had been operational for, and that it previously brought inert waste into the site. It was a non-hazardous landfill site. It effectively it was, household dustbin waste that was being brought into the site. Just wanted to confirm that. And she talked about whether asbestos would remain in the soil once treated and then being placed on the being placed onto the site for onto the wider landfill site for restoration purposes. It is a valid point, but again, it is one that I would expect to be covered through the environmental permit. The environmental permit and the environment agent would need to be satisfied that the soils were safe for their intended final use.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm sorry, Mr. Marshall, do you have anything to add, or can we move on?
Only that the Environment Agency do make that point in their consultation response, that the applicant will have to demonstrate that the soils are clean and suitable to go towards the restoration of the landfill site, and the landfill site is covered by a separate environmental permit which dictates the materials that can go into that site. So it is a permitting issue.
Sorry, Chair. Can I just one other thing, which is planning related, is there was the reference to the sensitive aquifer, and I mentioned it in my presentation about that the surface waters will be captured, and that matter is dealt with through condition 11 of the recommended conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. That was my question, so thank you for coming back to that. Members, do you have any questions for clarification purposes for Ms. Deuce? Councillor Creamer.
Yeah, just when you started, you mentioned about the sheeting of the lorries. Has there been any problems on the roads at the present time?
Yes, there was a recent report of unsheeted lorries in August that we actually only just received a response back from last night, and that was inconclusive. It's waiting further investigation, but it is an ongoing issue. Litter picks have regular litter picks pick up bags and bags of ejected waste and waste along that site and along the Bort, which is the shortcut, which is not the intended route.
Any other questions from members for clarification purposes? Sorry, Ms. Deuce, if I may then, just one question on the last point that you've made there about littering. For my sins, I'm a chair of a parish council and I regularly do litter picks in my own parish. Are you able to specifically link litter or debris that you've collected then to this company?
I think that would be difficult, but it's definitely more waste and load than sort of general litter. There is that as well, but yeah, it's commercial content of lorries that escape and are ejected from lorries as they go down, particularly Daneshill Road.
Thank you for that. Okay, if there are no other questions from members for Ms. Deuce, if I may then move on to our next speaker, which is Mr. Simpson, representing Landfill Parish Council.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to object to this application and echo the comments that have been made by the other parish councils. We would question the need to use hazardous contaminated soil to reinstate the site, given the length of time that there is to reinstate it. And obviously, if the applicants are saying that they can't attract sufficient soil, we would find that difficult to believe, given the amount of development that's gone on in the area in the last few years. We would also object on the ecological grounds that have already been covered in other objections, that the processing the hazardous waste on the site in the open air is not suitable. We would also echo Sutton's point that we were not consulted at all, either by the applicant or by the county council, which is particularly disappointing given how involved Ranskill were in the original restoration of the nature reserve. And we have had comments from a number of residents about the lack of consultation. I believe the officer's report obviously references the current pandemic as why the traditional public meetings, forms of consultation haven't been held. But we would expect an applicant on an application such as this to use alternative methods such as online consultation, and we don't feel that the consultation has been adequate in this case. We would also object on the transport grounds and would reinforce Torworth Parish Council's point that there is frequent unsheeted lorries sighted along the HGV route from Blythe that passes through Ranskill onto the North Road and subsequently to Daneshill, and that there is a historic issue with waste escaping from unsheeted lorries along Daneshill Road, and that is obviously going to be much more serious. Hazardous waste is being transported. We would also ask that the transport aspect is looked at along with the proposed expansion of the Rotherham sand and gravel activities at Scrooby Top, the HGVs for which will also pass through Ranskill and use many of the other surrounding routes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson, for your presentation. Mr. Smith, do you have any comments to make?
Yes, just one, Chair, and it was a point that was also made by Ms. Deuce previously. In regards to the potential for waste material to be lost off vehicles when they're in transit. I'm not going to query the accusations, that the suggestions that have been made that this has happened recently, but I'd just like to point the members to paragraph 44 of the report, which concerns the transport of material, and it states the applicant has further confirmed that only registered waste carriers will be allowed to transport the contaminated soil to the site, accompanied by the relevant hazardous waste consignment notes. Control of the HGVs and the duty of care for waste consignments will be subject to a high level of scrutiny as part of the environmental permitting conditions and duty of care regulations. Only soil with a waste description that cannot generate emissions will be accepted at Daneshill. So I think what I'm trying to say is that it would appear again that the permitting process will ensure that it will acknowledge the sensitivity of the materials that are being brought into site and would ensure that they are transported in a manner which reflects the sensitivity of the material on there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Marshall. Thank you. Members, any questions for Mr. Simpson for clarification purposes, please? I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, thank you, Mr. Simpson. In that case, then, can we move to our next speaker, please, which is Mr. Thistlethwaite, who is the agent on behalf of the applicant.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the planning officers for their considered reports that we've just heard and for their proactive engagement throughout the determination process, the entirety of which has occurred over the last challenging 6 months. At the outset, I would like to state our complete understanding of the local residents' concerns regarding particularly the asbestos element of the proposals. And just to clarify from what has been mentioned already, there's no difference in the type of material that is permitted into the Rowley Regis site and what is proposed at Daneshill. Whilst this will be a new operation on this particular site, it needs to be highlighted that the approach proposed is a well-established method for treating soils with hydrocarbons and asbestos debris, and it's widely undertaken in full regulatory approval across the UK on many development sites, a lot of them increasingly more constrained than the site that we're looking at today. What I hope is clear for members is both the high level of technical scrutiny and safeguarding measures that will be in place, as well as the anticipated very low volumes of the actual asbestos containing material that are likely to enter the site, the equivalent of about a skip a year based on the Rowley Regis operation. The applicant and the operator have committed to not exceeding the background reference level for asbestos content in the air, not just at the closest residential premises, but actually at the proposed operational site. This is the most stringent air quality restriction on operations of this type that I have experienced over the 15 years of working in similar projects in the industry. The planning process, which we are part of today, sits alongside the environmental process that is to be completed by the EA. The application for which has been completed and will be submitted immediately following any planning approval. The EA will undertake a further very detailed review of the proposals to ensure that it is both the best available technology and meets comprehensive technical standards and environmental protection required in order to allow a permit to be issued. This provides a belt and braces approach to the environmental controls in place on the scheme and should, I hope, provide comfort to members and local residents alike. Put simply, the project cannot proceed without the EA being satisfied that the environmental controls proposed are the best they can be and will ensure that these high standards are always maintained throughout regular enforcement visits and regular reviewing of air quality data, amongst other information during the lifetime of the treatment facility.
1 minute.
It should be noted that EA have not expressed any objections to the activities proposed, and they have been consulted thoroughly on the proposal by NCC multiple times throughout the application. If approved, the application will allow an additional much needed source of material to be brought in to deliver the approved restoration scheme for the wider landfill site. And if approved, the site will also provide employment and specialist training for up to 10 permanent members of staff. The majority of the roles will be open to be filled by local residents. The applicant and the operator are very keen to progress the operations on site, and it's likely that the planned construction and infrastructure growth, which we hope will all come forward in light of the government's current push to improve the economy in light of the COVID-19 restrictions, will increase demand for a facility such as Daneshill. In light of this, I respectfully ask that members endorse the planning officer's recommendation. Both myself and representatives of the FCC and the soil treatment specialist Provectus are available to take any comments that members may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thistlethwaite. Mr. Smith, do you have any comment to make?
No, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Can I just a couple of questions, if I may, for clarification, Mr. Thistlethwaite? We've heard reference from the speakers to the fact that your site at Rowley Regis is, which conducts a similar operation, is contained within a building. The actual operation itself is contained within a building before the soils would effectively be transported elsewhere following decontamination. You're not proposing a building on this site. If the Environment Agency in their adjudication on your permit application insists that you have to have a building, is that part of your process that you would intend to carry out?
I think I'll probably hand over to John Owens from Provectus in a moment, but I think we're confident that the proposals that we're being brought forward that accompany the planning application will be sufficient to satisfy the requirements of an environmental permit. I don't know, Mr. Owens, would you like to provide any comments further to that?
Only that the reason why we do the work at Rowley Regis inside the building is because it was the only place where we could do it. It's actually more risky to us because of the confined nature of the building, even with the excavators and traffic containment. It's still no difference, and most of the work we do around the UK and the rest of the industry does this work outside. A lot of it's done under mobile treatment licenses, so it's not a new thing by any stretch of the imagination that you need a building.
So, sorry, just to clarify that then. So Rowley Regis, because of the geographical location of your site there, you have a building, but you operate other sites as a company, or you are aware of other sites that operate that actually have a similar open air process as to the one that is being proposed?
The majority of treatment of asbestos is undertaken on construction sites, actually under a mobile treatment licence. There's only a handful of fixed facilities currently doing this process, just because asbestos in soils only become a big issue in the last sort of 8-9 years since the Environment Agency guidance changed on waste disposal. So there's no difference in our experience in emissions in the air, whatever technique you use to measure asbestos in air, between open air operations and indoor operations. In fact, if you're going to have higher concentrations, it will be in an indoor operation because there's no ventilation.
Thank you. I'm sorry, on a similar theme, for clarification, for me, the application I think refers to PPE being worn by your employees who would actually be involved in the asbestos picking operation itself.
Yeah.
but in respect to the rest of the site, would your employees on the rest of the site be expected to wear PPE or health and safety requirements such that there is not felt to be any requirement?
So we have a working or safe system of work around anyone working on the asbestos area, which involves wearing PPE, and that's part of the control of asbestos regulations requirement for non-licensed works. But for the rest of the site, no, there will just be standard PPE as you would have on the landfill. So hard hat, boots, nothing to involve any respiratory protection, because we've always got monitoring taking place to ensure that that's not required. And there's always the dust suppression if needed, but I don't think in the last 15 or so years since we've certainly been doing this type of treatment, we've needed really dust suppression, because we only accept soils that we know with lots of data won't generate emissions.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, my final question again for clarification. We've heard reference to the risks of airborne asbestos, and you've explained the requirements or non-requirement for your own employees to wear any sort of protection on the general site. Can you just explain to us the difference between bound asbestos and effectively airborne asbestos?
So we've got two
speakers, and I just need members to be absolutely clear what if you like, the difference is.
So the soil testing will check for asbestos fibres, and we will also have potential for visual pieces. So a piece of, say, a sheet roof from a garage, for example, or a farm building, which you can see. So we'll only go and visit sites where there's asbestos in soils, just to check, is it something we can physically pick out? And we'll take lots of samples to make sure if we do pick that asbestos out, then there needs to be pretty much no asbestos left in fibre form for us to want to accept it for treatment. So it really is just to make sure we go to site, we check that, because there's no point, there's no reason for us to take soil if we can't reuse it on the restoration area. So there can't be any asbestos fibres above a threshold that we've had accepted elsewhere, that if they exceed those thresholds, there's potential for asbestos release into the air, but we've never accepted any soil like that. Again, it's truly a comment, you can't pick asbestos fibres out of soil. You can't, it's only a big lump that you can visually see.
And I think one of the speakers referred to 300,000 tonnes of asbestos and oil reclamation. In terms of 300,000 tonnes of contaminated soil or reclaimed soils that would come onto the site, how much would you expect under a normal operation? What sort of asbestos content is? I appreciate that's very difficult to define, but perhaps you could help me.
We would rarely see fibres above the detection limit, so there was no fibres in the soil pretty much across the board. In the amount of asbestos in soil varies. We don't take on anything which is, should we say, riddled with asbestos. That's really for hazardous landfill. I mean, we're talking about a few pieces per load is quite normal for us to see. Sometimes not at all. It's just been brought in to be double checked before it goes into the restoration area. The last thing we want to see is stuff going direct into restoration and there being a piece of asbestos found. That does happen on landfill sites, so this gives us extra comfort by inspecting everything that comes in, that we don't end up with that going into restoration. Certainly for the biological treatment, which will be the predominant, I would expect to be the predominant part of the treatment, we've done that on many projects, the Olympics, the Challenge on the Railing, all big projects, and lots of residential sites for treating soil to be reused. So if it's suitable for reuse in people's gardens, I can't see why it wouldn't be suitable to be used on a restoration scheme.
So thank you, Mr. Thistlethwaite. Members, sorry, Councillor Creamer.
Yeah, just a question for clarification. From item 45 onto about 54, it does mention about how you're going to treat it, etc. So it's quite informative. But just 45 itself, the actual pre-acceptance testing, who will be doing the pre-acceptance testing? Will it be yourselves or another agency?
The client will provide testing, which is their waste description. So then we go and do some testing up by ourselves because we want to check that their waste description is accurate. If it's compliant, we will then allow them to bring it in on a condition that when it comes in, we check it again. And on the point of it being checked a second time at reception testing, that we can confirm it's accurate, the soil conditions, that's the point where we formally accept it and commence treatment. So there's, in effect, there's 3 tiers of checks.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Creamer? Thank you.
It does, thank you. It's just muting and unmuting.
Yes, we're all getting used to it. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Chairman. And Councillor Creamer has asked a very similar question to the one I was going to ask, but I know it sounds a bit repetitive, but we've really got to be sure that we have been assured that the concerns of residents have properly been addressed. So my question really to Mr. Owens is, as I say, partially repetitive, but, and forgive me if I don't quote you correctly, but you said something like you check that it is acceptable before it comes, and then you said you also check it to see if you will accept it. So it's sort of a double sectioned question. Do you actually go to where the source of the material is to check what they're going to be sending to you first? And then if when it's arrived and you say if it's contaminated you won't accept it, then how do you actually unaccept it? Has it already been tipped on the ground, or do you then, how do you then send it away? So we need to be getting that assurances that that asbestos has been properly addressed.
Yeah, so the first point is we do go to sites that have asbestos, because we need to be looking, before anything moves, we need to double check that it is only bound asbestos. If there's any evidence of other forms of asbestos, like AIB, insulation, lagging, anything that we can't treat, then we immediately will inform that particular customer that we can't accept it. So once we've done the site visits and had our own samples tested and analysed, the reason why we test it again at the Danes Hill site is to double check what they said they were going to send us. They have sent us, because we won't be on site when they're loading lorries. If the material is non-compliant against the original waste description, there's a formal EA permit process for rejection. Then we'll either reject it immediately, or if the reception testing then fails, so that the first rejection is a visual. If it's clearly not compliant with our requirements, it's immediately reloaded onto the lorry, and then it's that reception period, which lasts between 3 and 5 days, is effectively a quarantine period. And once the tests come back, if it fails, then you contractually are obliged to send the soil either back to the customer or onto another hazardous landfill. Out of the last, I think, 4,000 loads we've had in, we've rejected probably 3 loads, because we do so much work on the customer sites. So its prevention is the emphasis, rather than receiving soils and then having to deal with it.
Could I just come back very quickly, Chairman, please?
Yes, of course.
So yes, you said that it's if you were to reject it, then it will be reloaded back onto the vehicle. So assuming then that is a rejected load, and so as far as you're concerned, potentially it has contamination, in loading that back onto the vehicle to be sent away, how do you ensure that that contamination hasn't already escaped and caused the problems?
So the risk from asbestos is from dust emissions. So there's a standard form of dust suppression that we use with surfactants to ensure that emissions aren't generated. We've never had a situation where anything has come in with those levels of fibres, and certainly within soil, it's rare, very rare to see lots of fibres in soils above the detection limit. It's a very different situation to building products, which are in a different environment. So yes, there are standard methods that we agree with the Environment Agency for reloading soils back into lorries.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Longden, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a direct question for Mr. Owens. All through this debate we've just been having the presentations, I get the impression, this could be clarified for most people, I think. I get the impression this is the last process before it goes into landfill. Is that correct?
So once the soil's treated, it's then validated. So there's some EA guidance on how do you test soil and how many samples do you take prior to it going into the restoration scheme. So it needs to be meet risk assessment targets, so it can't pose risk to human health, grazing animals, groundwater receptors or surface water receptors, depending on what the local receptors are. So there is another step that will require a change to the restoration plan, because we'll be identifying targets for the soil to achieve prior to it being reused. So that there's lots of process testing as well. We spend.
But through all the process that's tested, the question still remains: based on the last processes, then I'll put plural there before it goes into landfill.
As long as everything meets the right criteria, once it's been screened and handpicked, then yes. But a lot of soil does end up being treated subsequently. Yeah.
That was my question. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Longden. Do I have any other questions from members for clarification purposes? No. Okay, thank you. In that case, Councillor Henshaw, I'm just seeing your hand raised.
Yes, thanks, Chair. It's just in relation to the applicant. Could they tell us why they decided not to twin track the application for the environmental permit in conjunction with the planning application? What was the thinking behind why they didn't do that? Thanks, Chair.
I'm happy to answer that one. First of all, there's two elements to it. We don't want to prejudge the planning process. You'll have heard a number of people are very interested in the proposals today. We need that to run its course. The fee for the permit itself is in the tens of thousands of pounds, and it's non-refundable once that's paid and that's in. So if we're in a position where we do not have a planning consent, we can't do anything. So realistically, we'd like to get some comfort and an approval on the planning position before pressing ahead. And as we've mentioned throughout, the permit application is prepared, it's ready to go. It's been prepared by the same team that have worked on the planning application. We didn't want to preempt or prejudge how planning would go. Let's go through the planning process, and then once that's been resolved, we would then go forward with a permit. But it's really just a risk management and keeping being sensible with finances.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Thistlethwaite. Thank you, Councillor Henshaw. If there are no other questions from members for clarification, I'll move to our last speaker, who is last but definitely not least, Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Though she be but little, she is fierce. There's been so much said already. I think I've probably done 3 rewrites whilst I've been listening to colleagues and residents. So I'm going to approach this in a slightly different way now, because a lot of questions have been asked. I think it's important to start by stressing the concern of the residents and the parish councils on their behalves. If you look at the number of objections received, 42 objections, 5 parish councils have written to object, 4 of whom have actually spoken to today's committee meeting. So I think that speaks for itself about the level of concern in the communities about this particular application. So I would ask committee members to actually, think very carefully about the people that this will impact. The debate over those resident fears seems to hinge a lot on the Environment Agency and the Waste Planning Authority's respective roles in this, and I appreciate that officers have attempted to address the notions of what sits within the planning regime and what sits within the EA permitting regime. For residents, there's a kind of sense of abdication of responsibility there, if that's the right word to use, because of that compartmentalisation of different elements of the process is, there is a sense that we as planning authority can potentially grant without people having been able to exercise and have satisfied the fears that they've got, because apparently so much of that rests with the EA to resolve. There's a sense that the EA hasn't really commented with any great vigour. You know, they've raised no objection, and yet they've said it's a sensitive setting for groundwater protections. They've recommended twin tracking, but they haven't, or we've heard can't enforce it. So you'll understand again why those community sensitivities are as strong as they are, because they feel in a way that they don't necessarily have a strong voice for representation in either quarter, and that the decision will be made beyond them and without really true consideration of their needs and their fears. I've kind of grouped my thinking into three areas, sort of around the business, the planning process, and people, because ultimately for me as a divisional representative, it comes down to the people. So if I look at the history of the site, we've said that this is a long-standing non-hazardous landfill site, and yet this latest application proposes to bring in hazardous materials, or at least to treat hazardous materials on the site. It proposes stages of screening and manual picking. The report at paragraphs 49 and 50 refers to dust suppression and air monitoring, and yet repeatedly we've heard that that will be done outdoors. And again, there is no great surprise that residents are fearful that activities taking place outside will pose a risk to them. I note in a couple of the paragraphs in the report that we're talking about holding areas being bunded with sealed drainage, and I know a few months ago we considered an application in Councillor Fielding's division where the activity related to asbestos was to take place indoors. Again, I would stress that this is an outdoor activity. If I look at the business, you know, comments within the report say that the sort of soils that they would have been importing were less, the business has been less commercially competitive, and it needs to offer complementary treatment services, that there are limited sites offering what they propose here. Well, with all due respect to the business, and without wishing to be cast as a NIMBY, you know, I'm not really too worried about whether you consider that you're commercially competitive. I am concerned that you want to run this operation in the midst of my community and amongst my residents. You say in the report at 114 and 115 that the location makes practical sense, that this is to be in a rural, sparsely populated area. And yet it also says that asbestos fibres travel some distance if airborne. So again, you know, I challenge colleagues on the committee today to consider the welfare of my residents in respect of it may be a sparsely populated environment to you. To me, these are the people that live here. These are the people that are living with something in an environment which apparently, according to the report, is less densely populated and therefore potentially less relevant. And I suppose I've really moved on already in saying that too, the notions of people. Ultimately, this application is about operations in a site which may well impact the lives of my residents. And if I look at the community experiences in this location, in the few years I've been an elected member, and that's only 3.5 years, we've had long established quarries. We've had test drills for coal bed methane and for shale gas. We're already dealing with a long-established landfill site, and we're talking about recycling. I joked, if that was the right word, a little while ago about the only application that we hadn't been seen to have to deal with being a nuclear reactor. And I have to say, on behalf of my communities, I do think that they have taken their fair share for Nottinghamshire. That kind of emotional take won't necessarily hold ground at planning. I appreciate that, but I would ask colleagues to think about the impact that this operation may well have on the lives of my residents, and I'm asking you today to actually go against recommendation and to refuse the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Mr. Smith, do you have anything you wish to comment on?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just on the point of Councillor Taylor talked about, at the respective roles, and that possibly that the local community might feel as though their voice won't be heard in terms of what is clearly going to be a very important environmental permit process, in the way that I would like to think that their voices have been heard in the planning process, particularly today at this committee. I would just refer back to what I said in my presentation at the start of proceedings, insofar as, as officers, we feel there will be benefit in you as chair writing to the Environment Agency on behalf of the committee, urging them to carry out a public consultation on the environmental permit application when it is submitted. It is at the Environment Agency. It's up to them as to whether they do or not, but there are clearly indications as to when they ought to be doing a consultation on permit applications, and one of those reasons is the amount of public interest, and clearly we have a significant degree of public interest in this application and this development as a whole, and so in response to that point, yeah, again, I would just like to reiterate that I think a letter to the Environment Agency would be worthwhile in that respect. Councillor Taylor also talked about the rigour of the Environment Agency's response and reference to twin tracking, but ultimately, they've made a clear statement with respect to the planning application that insofar as they've raised no objection, subject to that condition in respect of or conditions regarding drainage and any contamination, and those conditions are set out in the report. So, in terms of I think they have approached the application with rigour, but clearly they have another process which they need to equally approach with rigour. And the final point was just Councillor Taylor just made the comment about is this an acceptable use of this site, and clearly the report sets out that from a planning point of view, given its relative isolation and it's well screened by surrounding vegetation, it's well accessed via the access into the original landfill site. That in planning terms, the conclusion that we've reached is that it is acceptable, and the recommendation we've made to members is on that basis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I think there was a question for me in your response there to Councillor Taylor, and that would be that should this application be approved today, would I be prepared to write to the Environment Agency? Which of course I would, should that be the situation, recognising that clearly this is a contentious application and understandably one that excites great public interest and concern, and that's clearly recognised by the number of speakers that we have here today and the number of other representations that have been made. So should that be the case, yes, of course, I would be more than happy to compose a letter along the grounds that you've already suggested. I think that sort of clears up that point, hopefully. Members, do you have any questions for clarification purposes for Councillor Taylor? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up, so I think you got let off lightly there, Councillor Taylor. Okay, we've completed all our presentations and representations from speakers, both for and against the application. So, members, the floor is yours. And I know that a number of questions have been asked during the course of presentations, and I felt that it was better to do it that way so that you didn't lose sight of the points that you may wish to make by saving them all up until the end when all the speakers had completed. But for any other members who have questions that they wish to ask, or members who've already spoken with additional points, then please indicate. And I have Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I realise it sounds like we're labouring the point, but our main concern is we've got to ensure that if we were to approve this application, we are protecting the interests of the residents. So I feel justified in sort of as I say, labouring the point a little bit. And I wonder if I could just ask Mr. Smith a two-pronged approach. Firstly, just to follow on from my questions to the applicant, in what way, and I'll use the words grill and interrogate because we are talking about a dangerous substance and it's very important. So in what way have officers grilled and interrogated the applicant and gained that assurance that the proper procedures will be taken in order to protect the public from asbestos and to ensure that danger and that hazard doesn't occur? And then secondly, and I did look page 66 and 67 of the report, starting from paragraph 58 onwards, and it talks about monitoring, and it talks about mainly the applicant or the operator monitoring it. What steps is the council going to take to monitor this as well? Or will it be left to the Environment Agency to monitor it? Would there be any planned visits, or would there be any spot checks, etc., to ensure that everything was being done correctly? Because I also note paragraph 63, it says near the end, the applicant considers it unnecessary to undertake off-site monitoring, which would provide no additional protection. So how does that gel with the checking of the loads before they actually arrive on site? So, sorry, Chairman, but I think we really got to get to grips with this, the hazard and the monitoring and an assurance that the asbestos is being fully dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, Joel might be able to answer this in a little bit more detail. In terms of, we certainly have gone back to the applicant in light of consultation responses that we've had and comments that we've had from members of the public, and have sought assurances from them in terms of how the site would operate safely. I might ask Joel to speak on that in a moment. In terms of monitoring, yes, the Environment Agency would monitor it, but if planning permission must be granted, there will be a planning permission issued by the County Council's Waste Authority, which would need to be monitored. And we have a team of enforcement officers. The site is regularly visited. It's been visited a couple of times this year. The frequency of visits usually reflects the amount of activity taking place on site. And so don't take it that if planning permission is granted and the site becomes operating, that it will only be monitored a couple of times a year. It might be the case that we increase the level of monitoring that we undertake, and we can do spot checks. As Councillor Taylor has alluded to, there are quite a lot of developments in that part of the county for which the County Council is responsible as either the Minerals or Waste Planning Authority. So it is quite easy for officers to pass by Daneshill at any point they're choosing when they're visiting another site in that area. And on the off-site monitoring, it was, I think the point that the applicant has made is that measuring any potential asbestos releases at source is the most appropriate way to monitor those releases, and you will capture the greatest amount of information in terms and be able to deal with those releases more promptly and more efficiently if they are monitored at source. And I think that was the thinking behind it. But again, we're talking about asbestos releases, and again, I'll make the point again that would ultimately be something to be considered by the EA through the permit application, and if they deem that off-site monitoring is required in order to protect local residents and to deal with that element of pollution, then that is something that the operator would need to pick up on through the permit process. So I'll just hand over to Joel.
Yes, I mean, clearly, a number of concerns have been raised by the objectors and people who've written into the application. I've gone back to the applicant several times to raise these concerns and seek answers. I've attempted to address that in the report and set out in detail how the management steps would be taken, what steps would be taken to manage the site. You know, we've got a good level of detail as a planning application before us to consider. More information will ultimately have to be considered as part of the environmental permit application to the Environment Agency. And as I said earlier, I think we can expect a robust assessment by the Environment Agency on this particular permit application when it's made. On the monitoring, I'd just like to add that, yeah, monitoring forms part of the permit process, and you know, it should reinforce it should demonstrate effectively that what they are proposing is being done correctly and is not leading to release of emissions. We recognise obviously that there is the anxiety of I guess what you can't see, the invisible nature of this, and therefore in our recommended conditions we are recommending both a community liaison forum and also the condition limiting the release so that it would not exceed background levels. So those are conditions 32 and conditions 10. Together, that will provide a mechanism for sharing monitoring results with the community and showing and demonstrating to the community that it is being run effectively and it is being monitored effectively, both by the applicant, both by also the Environment Agency and ourselves as a waste planning authority. So we've added those conditions to provide the reassurance is needed, recognising the concerns being raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Councillor Clark, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just wondered if we could also just get, because obviously we've been to the site, just to assure residents we've seen the roads, etc. And so I'm conversant with the environment that is in the community. I just wondered whether how are we going to protect against any HGV routing that may decide, oh, I can't be bothered to wait for you know, a railway crossing or whatever. I'll just try and go in another direction. How are we, again, monitoring wise, how are we going to monitor the HGV routing?
Mr. Smith, Mr. Marshall, which one of you?
Chair, I'm happy to pick that up. And effectively, if I can find the condition, you know, stick your hands on it when you need it. Give me 1 second. I do apologise. No. Oh, crumbs. I mean, effectively, what we've discussed with the applicant in terms of the requirements of it's condition 21. All drivers of HGVs accessing and leaving the site and association with the development hereby permitted shall be advised to use the established lorry route, including as part of any contract with third parties for delivering or taking materials away to and from the site. I think it's that final element of the condition which I think is the important bit, insofar as we are seeking assurances that when the applicant enters into any contract with a third party for the delivery or taking away of materials to and from the site, that the lorry routing requirements form an integral part of that contract, and we believe that with that in place, those routing arrangements will be adhered to.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Creamer, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, Councillor Clark has asked mostly what I was going to ask, and I'm very happy with the responses of the officers and the work they put in for doing it. But as part of a statement from myself, if you like, is that I'm concerned about it in the respect of the environmental impacts and the environment, and that we can't actually deal with. But I thank the chairman for actually going to write a letter to the Environment Department, because I think it's fairly clear the concerns people have of the actual site in asbestos. And I do have a particular interest in asbestos, as one of my friends, funnily enough from Sheffield, not that far away, actually died of mesothelioma about 15, 20 years ago. Long time friend. So yes, I need to be sure that we're doing everything we can as a planning, and I am assured that we are. The rest is up to the Environment Department. Personally, I expect they'll come back with another planning permission asking for a shed on the site, but that's up to the Environment Department. So yes, as long as we're showing that we're doing everything we absolutely can to protect the communities, I'm happy with the planning going ahead. It is the environment bit, and hopefully they're as robust in their discussions as we've been in ours. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Creamer. I don't think it possibly needed a response from you, Mr. Smith, but is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No.
No, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, many of us members have landfill sites and gravel and sand sites over the county, and we do have a liaison committees. Is there a liaison committee here? And I'm sure if there isn't, I'm sure they could set up one, and it would help with the community with all the fears. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. I agree with you totally, and in actual fact, in some pre-discussions, we did have this conversation with officers, and condition 10 on page 109 does state that within 3 months following the date of commencement as notified under condition 2A, a scheme for the establishment of a local liaison forum, including its terms of membership and reference, shall be submitted to the WPA for its approval in writing, and that the scheme shall operate in accordance with the approved terms for the life of the development. Like you, Councillor Walker, I actually sit on one of these liaison committees for a quarry in my own area, and I think they're an extremely useful forum for local parish councils who are automatically members if they so wish, to be able to raise concerns, particularly around HGVs on occasions, directly with the company, and of course with local elected members and officers from the planning authority present at those meetings. I think they're a very useful format, and it's a condition that I welcome. I don't know if there's anything you wish to add, Mr. Smith.
No, Chair. I think you just about covered it all, and yeah, you know, it would be we would work with the local communities to make sure that that they are all fully represented on that liaison group as and when you know, if it is if permission is granted and it's taken forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Are you okay with that, Councillor Walker?
Yes, thank you.
I'm not seeing any other hands up. Are there any other comments or observations from members? Councillor Longden.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering whether to do this or not. But all through this, it's the main thing is about asbestos. I was saying the disease there for a moment, and I know about asbestosis. And it's all airborne, asbestos, any things will go ahead in that respect. But I'd like to draw members' attention to page 66 and 67, and part 9 on page 67. If one reads this, dust suppression cannons and prey mist air. So I've got the impression any airborne things may may not happen, the asbestos. And the amount of asbestos they say that could be in this is like crazy as I said earlier, 0.02%. But any asbestos, you know, is dangerous. After all, I've had pneumonia, don't forget, that's another story. But I think a lot of questions as regards the airborne is answered on part 9. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Longden. Is there anything, Mr. Smith, Mr. Marshall, you wanted to add to that?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Henshaw.
Yeah, it's not in relation to the airborne asbestos. I think we've considered a lot of the issues around the asbestos very carefully, and that will help us with our deliberations when determining the application. The thing I want to ask about is, you know, I've got a very large interest in light and light pollution, or minimising the effects, and I note from the recommendations in relation to the conditions that there is a point in paragraph 8 on the ecology and habitats relating to minimising the effects on nocturnal animals and things. I just wondered in respect to future reports if we could have a paragraph in relation specifically to light pollution and minimising the effects of inconsiderate lighting in relation to how we present reports, and just to make it clearer. I just wonder what the officers thought about that. It'd be helpful if they could. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Henshaw. And I can see from your backdrop there that obviously light pollution would be have a great effect on your screen there.
Yeah.
Mr. Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Henshaw is correct, pointed to Condition 8, and it is that Condition 8 has been written specifically with regards to, you know, protecting bats. And I think at the end of the day, we don't, you know, conditions are bespoke for each application that we deal with, and here we're looking at a site which is kind of well surrounded by vegetation, and given the distance, you know, the 200-metre distance between it and the nearest properties, I think any light spill from floodlighting would be minimal. And I'd just like to make the point, which I'm fairly sure the applicant made when we were on the site visit, when they indicated that they wouldn't work once it got dark anyway. So I suspect that any use of floodlighting on site would be minimal, because I'm fairly certain they indicated that when we were on site.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Smith. They did at the site visit. I think there was a question specifically about lighting and potential light pollution, and in fact, once the hours of darkness, that they can't operate anyway. Practically can't operate. Okay. That was the assurance that we were given.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I'll be watching future recommendations in relation to light pollution and bring it up. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Henshaw. Councillor Allen, please. Councillor Allen.
It's the mute button again. I'm sorry. I'd just like to reiterate what Councillor Creamer has said. As being part of the building trade for many years, we all know that if we meet asbestos, we just step back very sharply and do something about it. The fact that someone's handling asbestos is a concern to me and a real worry. But I am reassured by the fact that the Environmental Agency is going to run their eye over this, hopefully with a fine-tooth comb, and decide the final situation. If it wasn't for that, I would struggle to pass this, but because they're involved, I'm reassured and will approve the plan permission. I apologise for my voice. It's not coronavirus, I don't think. Sitting here for hours not speaking.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Allen. If there are no more questions or comments from members, I'd like to now move to the vote. I think the matter has been well deliberated. I don't intend to do any summing up, because I think that all the points, the issues have been well debated and addressed in presentations by objectors, the applicant, and in responses by officers. So I'll let members judge the application on its merits and the information that you have in the papers before you and the responses that you have received today. In order to make this voting easier in this virtual setting, I'll again ask the clerk to read out members' names alphabetically in order for them to confirm whether they are voting for or against the recommendations, or indeed abstaining. Please note that the votes today will not be recorded in the minutes of the meeting, unless 2 or more members requested it. So this isn't a named vote per se, in line with usual recorded vote arrangements. This is just simply to ensure that members' votes are properly identified, as I say, in this sort of weird and wonderful virtual world that we are living in at this moment in time. So, Mr. Barker, if I could ask you, please.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry to interrupt, Chair. It's Rachel Clack, the solicitor. If I could just perhaps suggest that, because we do have an altered recommendation from the recommendation paragraph 292 in the papers, if perhaps Mr. Smith could put it back on the screen, the recommendation, which is just to reflect that this matter has been referred, the environmental impact assessment has been referred to the Secretary of State for a screening direction. And so any resolution to grant planning permission, which this committee may make today, would be subject to, first of all, the Secretary of State issuing a negative screening direction. Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification, Ms. Clack. So the matter on which you are being asked to vote is the one that is now clearly before you on the screen.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Barker.
Councillor Allen.
4.
Councillor Barnfather.
4.
Councillor Brown.
4.
Councillor Clark.
4.
Councillor Creamer.
4.
Councillor Fielding.
4.
Councillor Harper.
4.
Councillor Henshaw.
4.
Councillor Longdon.
4.
Councillor Madden.
Against.
Councillor Walker.
4.
Councillor Wetton.
4.
That's carried unanimously, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Barker. Thank you, members, and particular thanks to all those who have taken the time and trouble to respond and indeed to attend today and make their representations. Right, if I can then move on, please, to the next item on our agenda, which is now agenda item 7, but 8 on your papers, and that's pages 129 up to 148 in your bundle, which is change of use of caretaker's bungalow to school use and erection of high security fencing, Woodland View, Huthwaite. Could I ask Mr. Marsh, please, to present this item?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Chair, could I just interrupt? I'm sorry to interrupt at this stage, but I just have asked a clarification for the last item, which members have just voted on, whether it was unanimous or whether there was actually one vote against.
There was one vote against.
There was one vote against, so therefore it was not unanimous. Okay, if that could just be recorded, please, Mr. Barker. Okay, thank you.
Right, sorry, Mr. Marsh.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Having a slight IT problem here. Can you you can see the presentation?
We have a screen before us, yes, which is the application.
Okay, thank you. Planning permission is sought to change the use of the caretaker's bungalow of the former John Davies School, which is now called Woodland View Primary, following the redevelopment of the school site in 2015. The bungalow was excluded from the planning application site when the school was redeveloped. This planning application would take the bungalow into educational use and would be incorporated into an enlarged campus at Woodland View Primary. The school currently uses a studio within the main school building as a nurture area. It is proposed that the bungalow would be used as a nurture unit, allowing the school studio to be used as a classroom to accommodate the children on roll. 2 larger cohorts were admitted to the reception school year in 2015 and 2019 to meet a demand for pupil places in Huthwaite. Consequently, there are currently 2 bulge year groups at the school. The number of pupils on the school roll for 2020-21 and pupil projections to 2026-27 are shown on this slide, although the applicant points out that the school may be required to admit 2 or 3 children above the published admission number. Numbers on roll can also vary as families move into or leave the school catchment during the school year. Pupil numbers will fall in 2022-23 when the first of the school bulge year groups leaves the school, and gradually rise in the second bulge year as the second bulge year moves through, before falling again in 2026-27. The nurture unit will be used by small groups of children and will provide a safe, calm area for a planned programme of activities for children with complex educational needs. The facility would allow children to remain within a mainstream school environment. 2.4 metre high Harris-style security fencing typically used at schools would be provided between the bungalow and the northern and southern boundaries, returning inside the mature hedge line to meet the eastern boundary. A pedestrian access gate would be provided in the northern boundary, along with a new footpath link to the school building. That's this one highlighted here. A new area of outdoor hard play would be formed to the north of the bungalow, with the grass area retained between the bungalow and the southern boundary hedge. Children would access the nurture unit from the existing school site. No changes are proposed to the means of pedestrian or vehicular access to the school, and vehicular access to the properties accessed along the drive between 49 and 51 Barker Street, shown on the photograph on the left, would also not change. Representations have been received from 4 local residents that raise issues of land ownership and rights of access over land between 49 and 51 Barker Street as a means of access to the school, potential impact on ecology from works affecting an existing hedge, a lack of security at the school pedestrian entrance, and amenity impacts arising from parent parking and poor behaviour outside the school gate at school start-finish times, all of which are reported at paragraph 24 of the report. A public footpath runs between 49 and 51 Barker Street, and the route is already used as a pedestrian entrance to the school. The public footpath is shown here. The drive between the properties is used as the means of vehicular access to the former caretaker's bungalow, as well as vehicular access to properties at 41 to 41 to 51 Barker Street. The application does not propose to change existing access arrangements, and although land ownership and rights of access are raised in representations, they are not material to the determination of this planning application. Notwithstanding planning permission that may be granted, the applicant would need to ensure that appropriate rights of access are in place. The proposed fence would be sited inside the boundary hedge line, and there are no ecology impacts. Lack of security at the access gate is raised in representations. Safeguarding and site security is a matter for the school, but the additional suggested measures for CCTV and lighting suggested at paragraph 24K do not form part of the application for determination. The representations report poor parent behaviour outside the school gate. There is the potential that this could increase as pupil numbers will rise slightly, but it is considered that this is unlikely to result in a material change such that planning permission should be refused. It is recommended that planning permission is granted subject to the conditions set out in Appendix 1, which include conditions that would limit use of the bungalow to purposes related to Woodland View Primary School, and for it not to be used as a separate unit, which could attract additional traffic to the site, and that the access between 49 and 51 Barker Street is not used as a means of vehicular access to the existing school site. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. We have a recommendation. I formally move that recommendation. Do I have a seconder, please?
Yeah, Councillor Creamer, formally second and reserve the right to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Creamer. We have no speakers on this application, so members, the floor is yours. Any questions or observations of the officer? Councillor Longden, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've read no question for the officer. I've read this a couple of times, and I just see it as a win-win for all of us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Longden. Any other speakers, please? No. In that case, we'll move straight to the vote. It's a very simple application, so I don't intend to do any summing up on it. We'll move straight to the vote, if I may. Mr. Barker, could I ask you to do the necessary, please?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Allen.
Sorry, I think you mute, Councillor Allen.
Turn it off.
Sorry. 4.
Right, thank you. Councillor Barnfather.
4.
Councillor Brown.
4.
Councillor Clark.
4.
Councillor Creamer.
4.
Councillor Fielding.
4.
Councillor Harper.
4.
Councillor Henshaw.
4.
Councillor Longden.
4.
Councillor Madden.
4.
Councillor Taylor.
4.
Councillor Walker.
4.
Councillor Wetton. Councillor Wetton.
Unmute. Unmute.
Councillor Wetton, are you with us?
I heard a crow before.
Councillor Wetton, do we have you?
Councillor Wetton currently on mute.
Really?
Okay. One last try. Councillor Wetton, are you with us? Well, in that case, it's. Sorry. Yes. No. Right. In that case, it was unanimous for all those who were with us, other than Councillor Wetton, who were unable to record his vote. Okay. Thank you for that. The application is approved. Moving on to item 9, please, which is now, of course, item 8, which is Development Management Progress Report. Can I ask Mrs. Gill to introduce this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. This report is your regular update report on the applications we've received and determined since the last committee. Myself and the team would be very happy to answer any questions on any individual applications. And as ever, at paragraph on page 153, we set out the applications that are targeting the next committee. So we've so far got one application down for November's committee, and then a few more for you in the new year. But myself and the team will be happy to answer any questions on any individual applications. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Mrs. Gill. So the recommendation is that the committee considers whether there are any actions they're required in relation to the contents of the report. As of page 149, I move that formally. Do I have a seconder, please?
Councillor Creamer, second, and formally reserve the right to speak.
Thank you, Councillor Creamer. Any comments, questions for the officer?
No.
No. I'm sure you'll be pleased to see that there's only potentially one item on the agenda for November after a rather lengthier meeting this morning. So that does bring the, I'm sorry, I'm taking that all those are in favour. It's not a formal vote for this unless anybody's objecting to it. No, I'll take that as read then in that case. I thank you for your deliberations and contributions today. That was a difficult application, I think, that we considered. A very, it was an emotive application, understandably so. And I want to thank members for their very constructive comments, questions and observations. On that, I'll bring the meeting to an end. And thank you, officers and members, for your time today.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Bye now.
Yeah, bye.
Cheers.